On this quiet December night, welcome to the missing bell of Christmas Eve. A bedtime story, a sleep story, a relaxing story, woven gently into a guided sleep meditation, whispered to you from the low-lit studio of Midnight Murmurs Radio. I am Ebeline Blackwood, and tonight I invite you to follow me into a tale wrapped in soft winter hush, flickering lantern glow, and a mystery older than the town that tries so hard to forget it. Before we begin, let yourself settle into a warm, comfortable position, letting the weight of blankets fall softly against your body. Take a slow breath in, feeling your chest rise, and then release it gently, allowing the last traces of the day to drift away. Close your eyes, if you haven't already, letting your shoulders drop. Your hands relax, your heartbeat slow to a peaceful rhythm. As you breathe, imagine yourself stepping away from everything that troubles you, away from noise, pressure, expectations slipping. Instead, into a quiet, safe corner of your mind, where only calm exists. Tonight's story will carry you there, like a soft tide drawing you toward rest. Let the world fade. Let the night deepen. And now, come with me to the town of Elderbrook, where snow falls, not in flakes, but in slow, shimmering feathers of light, drifting across rooftops that have weathered centuries of winters. Streets wind through the town like ancient ribbons of cobblestone, slick with frost, echoing softly with every distant footstep. Elderbrook looks peaceful, almost impossibly so, but beneath its holiday garlands, its evergreen wreaths, its warm windows glowing gold against the cold night, there lies a secret older than any Christmas celebration, a secret that begins with a missing bell. On the edge of town stands St. Elora's Chapel, a wooden structure built long before Elderbrook took shape. Its roof sags slightly under the weight of time, its stained glass windows shimmer with faded colors, and its bell tower risses quietly into the snowy night, or at least it once did. For on Christmas Eve, long ago, the chapel's great bronze bell rang for the final time, then vanished without a trace. No broken metal, no footprints, no forced doors, just emptiness, a hollow silence where music used to live. Some say the bell was stolen, others whisper the bell was cursed, and a few, those who still remember the old tales, claim the bell never truly left at all, that it only hides when the wrong people listen. Tonight, you'll walk gently beside Clara Waverley, a young archivist who has come to Elderbrook for the holidays, hoping to catalogue forgotten records in the town's historical library. Clara is soft-spoken, warm-hearted, and quietly sensitive to things most people no longer believe in. And on her first night in Elderbrook, as she walks through softly drifting snowflakes, mittened hands tucked inside her coat, she hears something impossible, a single, distant chime, faint, metallic, echoing through the cold, like a breath from another century. Clara stops, breath catching in the chilled air. The streets around her are empty, lined with garlands that sway gently in the wind. A lamppost flickers, humming. Snow gathers on the brim of her hat, and then it comes again, a soft, deliberate ring, as though beckoning her towards something old, patient, and waiting. She turns toward the sound, her boots crunching lightly along the cobblestones. Each step draws her deeper into Elderbrook's quiet heart, past houses that lean slightly from age, past windows filled with sleepy golden light, past the town square where a Christmas tree glimmers with silver ornaments and delicate strands of tinsel. The air grows colder, the sky darker, yet the bell's chime grows clearer, almost soothing in its rhythm, like a memory brushing against the edge of her thoughts. Clara whispers to herself, wondering if the sound is simply the wind. But part of her knows that Elderbrook is a place where history lingers, where stories do not stay buried, where winter nights stretch long enough for the past to breathe again. And as she steps toward the chapel, its silhouette rising before her like a shadow waiting to be understood, the bell rings a third time, soft, lonely, aching with something that feels almost human. And so, our story begins. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The third chime lingers in the air like a pale ribbon of sound, thinning slowly as Clara steps closer to St. Elora's chapel, its wooden frame leaning into the winter night as though exhausted from holding too many memories. Snow settles on the warped shingles, glistening faintly in the moonlight, and the old stained glass windows shimmer with colors so faded they seem half asleep. Clara pauses at the foot of the chapel's small stone steps, feeling the weight of stillness pressing gently against her shoulders. Her breath rises in soft white curls, dissolving into the cold. She listens, holding herself very still, waiting for another chime. But the night offers only silence, wide and deep. It is the kind of quiet that feels aware of her, aware of every shiver, every heartbeat, every hesitant thought drifting across her mind. Slowly, she lifts a gloved hand to the chapel door, old wooden slab with carved patterns that time has nearly erased. Her fingers brush against the handle, cold as ice, and in that moment a faint vibration hums beneath her touch, as though the wood itself remembers something and trembles. Clara pulls her hand back, startled, but the sensation fades almost instantly. She steadies her breath, whispers that she's simply tired from travel and snowfall, and reaches again for the door. It opens with a long, low sigh that seems too soft for its age, as though the chapel has been waiting for someone gentle enough to enter without force. Inside, the air is cool and carries the faint smell of pine, candle wax, and something older does, or perhaps time itself. Clara steps in, letting the door settle behind her. The chapel's interior glows faintly, with moonlight spilling through the stained glass windows, casting soft patterns across the wooden pews. Shadows stretch long across the floorboards, but nothing feels threatening. Instead, there is an odd comfort, a tender quietness, as though the walls are humming a lullaby meant only for her. She walks slowly between the pews, her boots making muted thuds on the wooden floor. The sound seems almost swallowed by the space, absorbed into a hush that wraps around her like a warm shawl. Her gaze drifts toward the front of the chapel where the bell rope still hangs from the ceiling, a frayed length of braided fabric, worn thin by hands that have long since disappeared from this world. Clara approaches it, heart beating a little faster, drawn by curiosity she can't explain. The rope sways slightly, though there is no breeze, no movement anywhere in the room. She stares at it, mesmerized by the gentle sway, by how deliberate it seems, as though greeting her with a slow nod. She glances upward toward where the bell should be, a space now empty, dark, echoing with the memory of something large and heavy that once hung there. The ceiling beams creak softly, but nothing else stirs. And then, soft as a breath against the back of her neck, she hears it. A whisper, not words, not even a voice, but the faintest brush of presence, like someone standing close enough to exist only at the edge of sensation. Clara stiffens, turning slowly, her gaze sweeping across the pews. They sit quietly in the moonlit stillness, untouched, yet she feels the whisper linger, trailing her as though curious. She tells herself it's the old wood shifting with cold, but the sensation settles deep in her chest, familiar, like déjà vu, as though some part of her has been here before. Her eyes drift toward a small alcove on the left side of the chapel, once used for prayer or confession. It now sits shadowed, its curtains half drawn. Clara Citatis then steps toward it, drawn by a faint glimmer in the darkness. As she nears, she sees that something rests on the small wooden shelf inside an object covered in a thin layer of dust. Her gloved fingers brush it gently, revealing a small brass plaque, tarnished but still readable. It bears an inscription in memory of those who listened too closely. Clara's breath catches. The words send a chill down her spine, not fear, but a sinking awareness that Elder Brooke's stories may be more than forgotten folklore. She lifts the object, a tiny brass ornament shaped like a bell, no larger than a walnut. It feels surprisingly warm in her palm. As she cradles it, a soft chime echoes not from the ornament, not from anywhere visible, but from everywhere at once. Like a memory rising from the floorboards, Clara gasps, the sound trembling through her bones, in a way that feels both intimate and ancient. The chapel responds with a subtle shift, as though exhaling after holding its breath for too long. And in that moment, Clara realizes she is no longer simply exploring history. She has stepped into something still alive, still waiting, still listening. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The tiny brass ornament rests in Clara's palm like a heartbeat, faintly warm, pulsing with something she cannot name. And as she stands in the quiet breath of St. Elora's chapel, the moonlight seems to deepen, the shadows stretching longer, softer, as though leaning in to listen. Clara swallows a slow breath, trying to steady her thoughts, but the warmth of the ornament spreads gently up her wrist, comforting in a strange, delicate way, like a long-forgotten memory brushing against her skin. The chapel remains silent, yet the air feels subtly charged, a hush that hums with something alive beneath the surface. She holds the ornament closer to her chest, watching the way its faint sheen catches the pale blue glow drifting in from the stained glass panes. For a moment, she wonders if she's imagining things, if the sound she heard, the whisper, the strange pull of this place, might simply be the exhaustion of winter travel and the weight of Elderbrook, esse errier charm. But deep down beneath her logic and steady nature, something in her knows this is real, knows the chapel didn't call her here by accident. Clara closes her fingers gently around the ornament and turns toward the front of the chapel. The bell rope sways again, slow, subtle, unmistakable. She approaches it cautiously, her boots brushing softly across the wooden floor. The closer she gets, the more the air seems to thicken with an invisible presence, A watchful quiet that feels neither threatening nor welcoming, but patient, waiting. When she reaches the rope, she stops just inches away from it. It hangs straight down now, still and silent, as though pretending it never moved. Clara lifts her free hand toward it, hesitates, then lets her fingertips graze the frayed fibers. A soft whisper, not a voice, but the sensation of one ripples across her mind. And suddenly she sees something, a brief flicker of imagery, like a candle in the dark. Snow swirling around a tall figure standing in the bell tower, their hands gripping the rope, their silhouette trembling as the bell above them begins to glow with an eerie golden light. Clara gasps and steps back, the moment vanishing as quickly as it came. The rope falls still, innocent. Her heartbeat quickens, but the air around her feels calmer now, almost protective. She glances at the ornament in her hand, its surface shimmering faintly, as though it has absorbed her fear and replaced it with quiet courage. She whispers to herself, "What happened here?" The chapel, of course, offers no answer. But something shifts in the air, again a gentle push, like an unseen hand guiding her attention toward the far right corner of the room, where a narrow wooden door stands slightly ajar. Clara frowns. She hadn't noticed it before. The door leads upward, a small sign above it reading Bell Tower Exit. Her breath clouds softly as she steps toward it, her boots creaking on boards that feel older with every step. The ornament in her hand grows warmer, not uncomfortably so, but reassuring, as if encouraging her forward. She nudges the door open with her shoulder. A narrow staircase rises into darkness, the steps steep, winding tightly into the unseen. Cold air drifts down from above, brushing her face with a faint metallic scent like old iron or weathered bronze. The memory of the distant chime echoes faintly in her mind. Clara tightens her scarf, steadies her breath, and begins to climb. The stairs groan beneath her weight, but they yield. Each step raises her into deeper cold, deeper stillness. The ornament glows faintly in her palm, its warmth spreading all the way to her fingertips, lighting her path with the softest golden tint. Halfway up, she feels the temperature shifting, abrupt pocket of warmth, as though someone had stood there moments before. She pauses, listening. Above, the tower whispers, with the subtle rustle of old rafters shifting, the faint tapping of snowflakes drifting through unseen cracks. And then she hears it again. A chime, soft, gentle, close. Clara's breath catches, her pulse fluttering. She takes another step, then another, drawn upward by a sound that feels not just heard, but felt like a memory vibrating through her bones. When she reaches the top, she finds the bell tower empty. No bell, no person, just moonlight filtering through open slats, snow swirling gently inside, settling on the wooden floorboards like pale ash. But there is something else. A circle, marked faintly on the floor, drawn with a substance that looks like old chalk or frost. And at its center an imprint, the shape of a large bell, as though its weight had pressed into the wood for years before vanishing. Clara kneels, her breath trembling in the cold air. She reaches out, her fingertips barely brushing the outline, when suddenly the ornament in her hand rings. A single, delicate, clear as glass, soft as breath, impossibly real. The tower seems to inhale around her, the shadows quivering, the moonlight bending subtly toward her, and Clara realizes she is no longer alone. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The delicate chime from the tiny ornament vibrates through the bell tower like a soft pulse, threading itself through the cold air and settling deep into Clara's chest, warm and strangely reassuring, despite the chill curling around her ankles. Snow drifts lazily through the slats, swirling in slow, dreamlike spirals, as though the tower itself is breathing with her, inhaling and exhaling in a rhythm older than memory. Clara rises slowly from her crouched position, the outline of the vanished bell still glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. The ornament in her hand feels almost alive now, humming gently, its warmth sinking into her palm, as if urging her to stay calm, to listen, to understand. She turns in a slow circle, scanning the empty tower. Wooden beams stretch overhead like the ribs of a giant slumbering creature, their shadows bending and lengthening in ways that feel purposeful, attentive. Clara whispers softly into the cold, "Who's here with me?" For a moment there is silence, deep, slow and heavy. Then a soft shift of air, like a muted sigh drifting past her ear. She doesn't move, doesn't breathe. And then the faintest outline begins to form near the far side of the tower, just beyond the imprint of the missing bell. A shimmer of pale light gathers slowly, not quite a figure, not quite a shadow, but something suspended between the two, flickering in and out of existence, like a candle flame caught in a restless wind. Clara's breath trembles, her instinct urging her to back away, but something gentler inside her quiet intuition, old sensitivity. The shimmering presence seems fragile, hesitant, like it fears startling her, like it's been waiting too long to be acknowledged. The ornament hums again, slightly stronger this time, and Clara feels a soft pressure on her thoughts, a sensation like someone trying to speak without sound, like a memory brushing gently against the edges of her mind. She closes her eyes and lets the silence settle, letting the cold kiss her cheeks, letting the tower's breath mingle with her own. And in the stillness she hears it not a voice, but a feeling translated into words. Listen. Clara opens her eyes slowly. The shimmering presence steadies, its form now clearer, faint silhouette of a person holding something heavy, something shaped like the bell that once hung here. Their hands tremble, their posture slumps with a burden she cannot name, and then the silhouette flickers, dissolves, and reforms again, this time surrounded by swirling snow and golden sparks that float like fireflies trapped in winter. Clara steps closer, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened to the bell? The presence wavers, then lifts one faint arm, pointing downward toward the town of Elderbrook sprawled quietly beneath the night sky. Lights twinkle from windows. Smoke curls gently from chimneys. Snow blankets, rooftops, and narrow streets in a peaceful stillness that seems untouched by the mystery hanging above. Clara follows the gesture, her heart tightening with a strange ache. The presence shifts again, a sliver of emotion brushing her senses. Regret, longing, all tangled together in a silent confession that chills her bones more deeply than the winter air. Suddenly, the tower creaks long and low, as though reacting to something unseen. The moonlight flickers. The beams above her groan softly, and the presence recoils, its outline trembling, shrinking, dissolving into drifting sparks that scatter like frightened birds. Clara reaches out instinctively. Wait, go. Don't go. But the presence collapses into a pale breath of cold air that brushes her cheek and vanishes into the swirling snow. The ornament in her hand glows, wans, warm and urgent. Then silence returns, ever expectant. Clara stands alone in the tower, trying to steady her breath, her pulse fluttering like fragile wings against her ribs. The imprint of the bell on the floor seems deeper now, darker, as though the emotion she witnessed has settled into the wood itself. She kneels again, letting her fingers hover over the outline. A faint vibration rises from the floor pseudo, rhythmic, like the faded echo of a bell still ringing somewhere beyond time. Clara's thoughts drift, threading together fragments she cannot yet name. The stolen bell, the sorrow of the fading figure, the strange inscription on the brass plaque, the warm hum of the ornament, as though it recognizes her. Something binds all of it, a decision made long ago, a consequence that still ripples through Elderbrook like a whisper trapped in winter. As she stands again, something new catches her eye, a trail of faint footprints in the thin layer of snow on the tower floor, small, human, leading toward the far wall and ending abruptly at the wooden beam, as though the person vanished mid-step. Clara's breath stops. She steps toward them, the ornament warm against her palm. A cold wind slips through the slats, extinguishing what little warmth remained in the air. And then, from somewhere deep in the chapel below, a sound soft, distant, echoing up the stairwell like a memory climbing its way back to her. A single, lonely bell chime. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The single bell chime rises from somewhere deep below the tower, soft, yet piercing through the cold stillness, threading its way up the narrow wooden staircase until it settles against Clara's ribs like a quiet knock from another time. She stands frozen beside the vanished footprints, the ornament in her hand warming rapidly, pulsing in a rhythm that feels almost like a heartbeat, not her own. The tower seems to tilt subtly with the sound, wooden beams trembling as if remembering something too heavy to hold. Clara swallows a shaky breath, trying to gather herself as the echo fades into the winter air, dissolving into the soft swirl of snow drifting through the slats. She feels watched not with menace, but with a strange, yearning attention, as though the chapel itself hopes she'll understand something long misunderstood. The warmth from the ornament spreads up her wrist, steadying her, grounding her. She exhales slowly, murmuring into the cold, "I hear you." The tower quiets in response, settling like a great creature easing back into slumber. She casts one last look at the footprints ending an impossible mid-step, then turns toward the narrow staircase. Each step downward creaks softly, carrying her back through layers of air thick with memory. The cold deepens with every turn of the spiral, as though whatever called to her from below still waits patiently. When she reaches the chapel floor, the air feels different, denser, more aware. Moonlight slants through the stained glass windows, painting long, liquid shadows across the pews, staining the floor in faded blues and reds. Clara moves slowly between them, her boots whispering against the wooden boards. Something shifts behind her just a flicker, a settling sigh, but she feels it like a feather brushing her shoulder. She turns, heart quiet but alert. The pews stand still. The windows glow faintly. Yet the ornament in her hand hums once, low and guiding, pulling her attention toward the far side of the chapel. There, near a small alcove she hadn't fully examined earlier, the air ripples so subtly, she thinks at first. It's her imagination, but as she steps closer, the ripple steadies, takes shape, forms a faint shimmer, like heat rising from cold stone. Clara pauses, breath caught. The shimmer spins once, like a soft whirl of dust caught in moonlight, then resolves into something clearer. The suggestion of a figure kneeling at the alcove's wooden prayer rail. The figure's head is bowed. Their hands clasp something heavy, something that catches the moonlight just enough for Clara to see the outline of curved metal. The bell, not the tiny ornament she carries, but the great chapel bell itself, cradled in phantom hands. Clara steps closer, drawn to the sorrow that pours from the shimmering form like a cold draught. The figure flickers, almost collapsing, then steadies again. She whispers, "Can you hear me?" The figure lifts its head, but where a face should be, there is only pale, trembling light. Yet she feels the gaze a weightless sadness drifting across her skin, settling over her like a thin blanket of frost. A faint breath pushes into her thoughts again, forming not words but impressions, feelings, regret, warning, longing, distance, return. The ornament pulses in response, and Clara lifts it slightly, letting its gentle glow spill into the air between them. The shimmering figure reacts instantly, lifting an arm as though reaching toward it. Snowflakes outside swirl harder, wind brushing against the chapel walls with sudden urgency. The bell in the phantom's hands glows faintly, a soft golden sheen emerging at its edges, trembling as though preparing to sound. Clara's breath stops. The figure tries to rise. Its form quivers, fragments, attempts to hold shape, and then, like a flame touched by wind, it flickers violently and collapses into a shower of pale sparks that scatter through the chapel like falling embers. Tear. Shudder. The ornament in Clara's hand grows hot, then cools instantly, as though a connection has been abruptly severed. The chapel groans softly, beams shifting overhead. Somewhere outside, a gust of wind sweeps along the snow-covered streets, carrying with it the faint echo of a distant, aching chime. Clara sinks onto the nearest pew, heart trembling in her chest. The silence thickens, again not empty, but full, like a room waiting for the next breath. She closes her fingers around the ornament, feeling its fragile warmth. "What happened to you?" she whispers into the quiet. Her words vanish into the chapel air, but something responds, not with sound, not with movement, but with a sudden tightening of cold around her ankles. A subtle pulling sensation that makes her lift her gaze toward the chapel door. It stands slightly open now, though she knows she closed it. Snow swirls gently at the threshold, drifting inward in soft spirals. And beyond the doorway, in the dim glow of the street lamp, she sees a trail of footprints leading away through the snow. Not hers. Not old, fresh, small, lonely, leading toward the heart of Elderbrook's silent Christmas Eve. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The outline pulses faintly, as though responding to her presence or to the ornament she holds. Without fully understanding why, Clara lifts the ornament and places it gently at the center of the imprint. The floorboard beneath it glows softly, a warm golden light blooming outward like a sunrise trapped beneath the wood. The room exhales. Lanterns flicker. The shadows stretch and quiver, and then Clara hears it not. Outside, not above, but deep beneath the floorboards. A low, distant bell. Shim. Slow. Heavy. Heartbroken. Calling. She whispers. Stunned. The bell. It's not gone. It's trapped. The ornament pulses once, bright and urgent, and then everything falls silent. The glow fades, the library stills. Snow drifts softly against the windows. Clara stands slowly, heart pounding with a mix of fear and wonder. She realizes, with quiet certainty, that she has taken the first step into a mystery far older and far heavier than she imagined. And nothing in Elderbrook's peaceful Christmas Eve is as simple as it seems. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Asterisk as the night over Hollow Creek thickened like a dark woolen blanket draped across the hills and the little wooden houses. Clara stood before the church door that had just closed behind her, and the lingering warmth of the faint lantern light still hovered around her hand, as if that light had not vanished at all, waiting to be awakened once more. And Evelyn Blackwood from Midnight Murmurs Radio whispered that sometimes the things we see on a winter night are not illusions, but fragments of memories stirred awake after a century of silence. And Clara descended the worn stone steps, snow settling on her shoulders in soft, careful layers, each flake landing as though it knew exactly where it should rest without making a single sound. And in that silence she heard a long, low resonance. Not the clear ring of a bell, but something rising from beneath the earth, from the buried layers of ancient snow where generations had walked and left their traces behind. A sound pulsing with the slow heartbeat of winter itself. And though the town slept behind windows fogged with frost, Clara felt a gaze from the edge of the western woods, where the darkness was always thicker, heavier, as if it guarded secrets untouched by light. And she followed the narrow path toward home, passing the old iron lampposts, lining the street, the dim golden glow melting downward over the snow like dripping candle wax, and a quiet warmth gathered in her chest, despite the wind sweeping sharply across her back. And Evelyn whispered that every old American town hides a story beneath its festivals, especially Christmas, when joy and old ghosts walk side by side. And Clara felt that truth tonight more clearly than ever, because the bell she had seen inside the church could not have been a trick of the eye. And if someone or something was carrying it, the reason was certainly not to frighten her. And in the hazy lamplight she noticed narrow footprints in the snow, long and light, like someone walking alone in the night. But something was wrong, for they did not press sharply into the snow as human steps do. They blurred softly outward as if made by something not heavy enough to leave a true mark, and Clara knelt to examine them, letting her hand glide over the fine, cold surface, the chill racing up her arm, even as she sensed the undeniable presence of whatever had passed here only moments earlier. And Evelyn whispered that spirits in old stories rarely allow themselves to be seen unless they are trying to speak. And Clara rose slowly, her gaze drifting toward the northern path where the tall pines formed a dark, towering wall. And she saw the strange light again, glimmering between the trees. Not fire, not lantern light, but something like the reflection from old pioneer glass, the kind once used to cast small church bells for holiday parades, a trembling glow shifting with every breath of wind. The outline pulses faintly, as though responding to her presence or to the ornament she holds. Without fully understanding why, Clara lifts the ornament and places it gently at the center of the imprint. The floorboard beneath it glows softly, a warm golden light blooming outward like a sunrise trapped beneath the wood. The room exhales. Lanterns flicker. The shadows stretch and quiver, and then Clara hears it not. Outside, not above, but deep beneath the floorboards, a low, distant bell. Shim. Slow, heavy, heartbroken, calling. She whispers, stunned. The bell, it's not gone. It's trapped. The ornament pulses once, bright and urgent, and then everything falls silent. The glow fades, the library stills. Snow drifts softly against the windows. Clara stands slowly, heart pounding with a mix of fear and wonder. She realizes, with quiet certainty, that she has taken the first step into a mystery far older and far heavier than she imagined. And nothing in Elderbru's peaceful Christmas Eve is as simple as it seems. As the sound fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Asterisk as the night over Hollow Creek thickened like a dark woolen blanket draped across the hills and the little wooden houses. Clara stood before the church door that had just closed behind her, and the lingering warmth of the faint lantern light still hovered around her hand, as if that light had not vanished at all, waiting to be awakened once more. And Evelyn Blackwood from Midnight Murmurs Radio whispered that sometimes the things we see on a winter night are not illusions, but fragments of memories stirred awake after a century of silence. And Clara descended the worn stone steps, snow settling on her shoulders in soft, careful layers, each flake landing as though it knew exactly where it should rest without making a single sound. And in that silence she heard a long, low resonance. Not the clear ring of a bell, but something rising from beneath the earth, from the buried layers of ancient snow where generations had walked and left their traces behind. A sound pulsing with the slow heartbeat of winter itself. And though the town slept behind windows fogged with frost, Clara felt a gaze from the edge of the western woods, where the darkness was always thicker, heavier, as if it guarded secrets untouched by light. And she followed the narrow path toward home, passing the old iron lampposts, lining the street, the dim golden glow melting downward over the snow like dripping candle wax, and a quiet warmth gathered in her chest, despite the wind sweeping sharply across her back. And Evelyn whispered that every old American town hides a story beneath its festivals, especially Christmas, when joy and old ghosts walk side by side. And Clara felt that truth tonight more clearly than ever, because the bell she had seen inside the church could not have been a trick of the eye. And if someone or something was carrying it, the reason was certainly not to frighten her. And in the hazy lamplight she noticed narrow footprints in the snow, long and light, like someone walking alone in the night. But something was wrong, for they did not press sharply into the snow as human steps do. They blurred softly outward as if made by something not heavy enough to leave a true mark, and Clara knelt to examine them, letting her hand glide over the fine, cold surface, the chill racing up her arm, even as she sensed the undeniable presence of whatever had passed here only moments earlier. And Evelyn whispered that spirits in old stories rarely allow themselves to be seen unless they are trying to speak. And Clara rose slowly, her gaze drifting toward the northern path where the tall pines formed a dark, towering wall. And she saw the strange light again, glimmering between the trees. Not fire, not lantern light, but something like the reflection from old pioneer glass, the kind once used to cast small church bells for holiday parades, a trembling glow shifting with every breath of wind. And Clara knew she had to follow it, even as her rational mind urged her to return to her warm home where the fire crackled and the thick blankets waited. But her hotter, perhaps a deeper instinct pulled her toward the forest. And though the thought of walking alone in the winter dark carried a hint of dread, she felt an unexpected calm wrapping around her, as if someone unseen was gently guiding her forward. And when she stepped between the two rows of pines, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound so faint she had to hold her breath to hear it. The delicate clink of metal touching metal, distant and slow, like a small bell being carried in a forgotten ritual. And Evelyn whispered that the supernatural often arrives at moments like these, when we are too tired to resist, too awake to deny, and too lonely to ignore what the darkness wants to reveal. And Clara kept walking, the snow beneath her feet soft as sifted sand, the tree shadows stretching long like fingers pointing the way deeper into the woods. And when she reached a small clearing, the glass-like light hovered still in the air, suspended as though by an invisible thread, and the shape of the bell grew clearer, not the grand bell of the church, but a small handbell once carried by the children of Hollow Creek during the Christmas Eve procession a century ago. And if it had returned tonight, it meant something from the past was finally ready to rise to the surface. And now, as the story gently drifts into the background, you may breathe more slowly. Let your shoulders loosen. Allow your eyes to close if they wish, and let the quiet of the winter night softly hold your mind. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The small bell hovered in the stillness of the clearing, its glassy glow trembling faintly like the last breath of a candle before sleep. And Clara stood at the edge of the trees with her breath caught halfway in her chest, watching as the soft halo around the bell pulsed once, twice, as though it recognized her presence. And Evelyn Blackwood from Midnight Murmurs Radio whispered that when an object of the past returns in the dead of winter, it rarely comes alone, for memory has a way of pulling its shadows with it. And Clara felt that truth sinking into her bones as she took a careful step closer, the snow beneath her crunching softly, though the bell itself made no sound, not even the gentlest chime, as if whatever force held it suspended also held its voice hostage, and the air around her shifted, warmer for a moment, like a breath from something unseen. And Clara whispered a soft hello, unsure if she expected an answer. But the clearing responded with only the faint ripple of wind moving through the pine needles, and yet she could feel the attention of the forest sharpening around her. A quiet, watchful presence stretching from tree to tree, holding its breath with her, and Evelyn murmured that sometimes the forest listens more than it speaks, especially when a story long buried is ready to rise. And Clara, clutching the edge of her coat, stepped forward again, her heart beating not in fear but in a strange anticipation, as though she had already been walking toward this moment long before tonight, long before she stepped foot into the old church or touched the lantern that glowed in her palm. And as she reached out toward the hovering bell, the light within it dimmed slightly, almost shyly, like a child hiding behind a curtain, and then brightened again with a gentle, welcoming flicker. And Clara felt warmth bloom across her fingertips before she even touched it. But when she finally did, her skin brushed not cold, metal or glass, but something softer, almost like a pulse beneath warm fabric, and a wave of images surged into her mind. Children running through snowy streets, their small boots kicking up powder as they laughed and rang their bells. A woman with a wool shawl standing at a doorway watching them with pride. A man in a long coat leading the procession, holding a lantern much like the one Clara carried earlier. And then, abruptly, darkness, followed by the sound of something heavy breaking. Something treasured falling out of sight. And Clara gasped, stumbling back as the bell floated higher, its glow stabilizing, steady and bright now. And Evelyn whispered that spirits often communicate through memory, because memory is the only language that survives after time has taken everything else. And Clara steadied herself, breath trembling, and called softly into the clearing, asking what the bell wanted her to see, what it needed from her. And the light responded by drifting toward the far side of the clearing where the trees grew denser, forming a narrow passage of shadows. And Clara realized the bell was guiding her somewhere deeper, somewhere older. And though she felt the cold tightening around her ankles, like a warning, her feet continued forward as if guided by a thread she could not see. And the forest closed around her in a cathedral of towering pines, their silhouettes rising like ancient pillars, holding up the heavy winter sky. And the further she walked, the more she sensed that the forest floor beneath her was not truly untouched snow, but something layered with footsteps from long ago, footsteps that refused to disappear entirely. And she wondered whose steps she now walked beside, whose memories were brushing against her own. And Evelyn whispered that history rarely vanishes, it only waits for someone willing to listen. And Clara stopped as the bell halted between two enormous pine trunks, its glow deepening into a soft amber, casting light on the twisted roots below. And there, beneath a thin crust of snow, she saw a fragment of wood no bigger than her hand, smooth and carved with a delicate pattern of stars, the kind found on old holiday decorations from Hollow Creek's earliest days. And Clara knelt, brushing snow aside until she uncovered the rest of the broken piece, realizing it was a fragment of a lantern frame, not unlike the one from her vision. And when she lifted it, the coal shot through her palm like a spark of recognition. And suddenly she heard it, the faint echo of a scream carried through time, followed by the crash of something shattering. and then silenced heavy enough to make the forest itself hold still, and Clara shivered, clutching the broken lantern piece to her chest. And she knew now that something terrible had happened during that long-forgotten Christmas procession. Something never written down. Something swallowed whole by the passing of years. And the bell floated closer, its trembling glow touching the wooden fragment, and for just a moment Clara thought she saw small hands reaching toward her in the reflection on the bell's surface, as though asking her not to look away, not to leave this story unfinished. And Evelyn whispered that once you begin to unravel a ghost's memory, you must be willing to follow it to the end, for only then can the restless find peace. And the bell drifted forward, leading Clara deeper still, toward a truth buried in winter's quiet heart, as the story drifts gently into the background. Let your breath slow. Let the stillness of the forest settle softly over you, and allow your eyes to close if they wish. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara followed the soft pull of the pendant's glow as it guided her deeper into the hushed corridors of Blackwood Lodge, the air thick with the familiar scent of old pine and cold winter stone. Evelyn's voice drifted gently in the background, like the faint echo of a memory, as though the lodge itself murmured its secrets through her. The flickering lantern in Clara's hand cast long, trembling shadows that seemed to breathe across the wooden walls as she stepped past rooms swallowed by the quiet of decades. Ahead, a faint shimmer lingered in the earthiness frost, delicate as breath on glass hovering above the floorboards. It reminded her of the strange, translucent figures she had glimpsed at the lake, drifting like fragments of forgotten dreams. She paused, listening. The lodge was silent, except for the soft creak of settling wood, the whisper of wind brushing against the outer walls, and the gentle thud of her own heartbeat. Then, somewhere down the hallway, came a small sound. A chime, faint, metallic, as though struck by a passing current of air. The pendant warmed against her chest. Clara tightened her grip on the lantern and moved toward the sound. At the end of the corridor, an old archway opened into a long gallery lined with tall windows. Snow pressed silently against the glass from the outside, muting the world into a pale, glowing haze. Inside, pale shapes drifted lazily through the gallery, barely perceptible, as though woven out of moonlight. Clara felt no fear, only a strange, serene pull. The same feeling that had drawn her since the moment she found the pendant beneath the fallen branches of the forest path. As she stepped forward, the shapes stilled. One of them, a softer, brighter flicker, slowly turned toward her. Though it had no face, no clear form, Clara sensed its gaze. The pendant brightened in answer. The figure drifted closer, its edges shifting like snow carried on a gentle wind. With each inch the air grew colder, but in an oddly calming way, as though the cold itself carried reassurance. Clara's breath fogged in front of her. "What are you trying to show me?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure the words were meant to be spoken aloud. The figure lifted slowly, gracefully, then hovered before one of the tall windows. The frost on the glass began to shift, patterns forming and reforming like living etchings. First, a circle, then branching lines, then a procession of tiny silhouettes. Clara's eyes widened. The frozen parade the same pattern she had seen etched into the stone slab in the clearing, the same symbol carved faintly into the floorboards of the old lodge. "You're connected to it," Clara murmured. "All of you." The figure pulsed gently, as though agreeing. The pattern swirled again, coalescing this time into something new, a large, ornate doorway crowned with snowflakes and winter sigils she did not recognize. Beneath it, a smaller shape glowed. Pendant pendan. Clara felt her heartbeat stutter. The frost shapes dissolved, the figure drifting back slightly, as if urging her to understand. Evelyn's calm voice brushed the edges of Clara's mind. Warm and steady. "Some doors are not found on maps, Clara, only in moments when the world grows still enough to remember what it has forgotten." Clara swallowed, her breath shaking as the gallery dimmed once more. She looked down at the pendant. Its glow had settled into a steady, patient light, resting like a small heartbeat against her skin. The message was clear, even if she didn't yet know how to follow it. She took a slow breath and whispered, "Show me the next doorway." The lantern flame fluttered. The shadows shifted. And at the far end of the gallery, a door she hadn't noticed before creaked open on its own, spilling a narrow beam of silvery winter light onto the wooden floor. Clara gathered her courage, drew the lantern close, and stepped toward it, each step carrying her deeper into the unseen story waiting beneath the snowbound silence of Waverly Hollow. Clara stepped toward the narrow sliver of silvery light spilling from the door at the end of the gallery, her breath slow and steady as the lantern flame wavered with each cautious step. The pendant at her chest glowed with a quiet confidence, its warmth pressing gently into her skin as if urging her onward. The gallery behind her faded into a soft haze of drifting figures and frostlit windows, their presence lingering like a memory she had not lived but somehow understood. As she reached the threshold, the door opened a little wider with a sigh, the old hinges releasing a sound that felt too soft to be mechanical, almost like an exhale of relief. Beyond it lay a narrow staircase, descending into a dim, bluish glow, as though the shadows themselves had absorbed the last light of a winter dawn. Clara hesitated only long enough to gather her courage before taking the first step downward. The wooden stairs were cold beneath her boots, humming faintly with each step, as if responding to the pendant's glow. The air grew cooler but sharper, carrying the clean scent of snow that doesn't they yet know it's about to fall. Evelyn's gentle voice drifted at the edge of Clara's awareness, soft as a lullaby. Not all paths beneath old lodges lead to secrets meant to be feared. Some led to memories waiting to be found. Clara tightened her grip on the lantern, watching the shadows stretch and curl along the staircase walls. As she descended the final step, the tight stairwell opened into a wide underground chamber, lit entirely by a soft bluish phosphorescence that seemed to seep from the stone itself. Pillars carved with swirling winter sigils circled the room, each one glowing faintly like moonlit ice. At the center of the chamber lay a circular pool of perfectly still water, its surface dark but not cold, reflecting her lantern's light as though the flame floated upon it. Clara approached slowly, sensing the same serene pull that had guided her through the gallery. The air hummed with delicate vibrations, almost musical, as if chords were being plucked by invisible hands somewhere beyond the stone walls. Then she noticed them tiny specks of light, drifting upward from the surface of the pool, delicate and weightless, swirling like fireflies caught in a winter breeze. They gathered above the water, coiling into a faint shimmer that rose toward the chamber ceiling before dissolving into the air. She knelt beside the pool. The water was impossibly clear. When she leaned forward, instead of her reflection, she saw something else: snow-covered trees, tall and silent, forming a path through a forest she had walked many times, yet never at night, never under the strange shimmering sky that stretched above it now. She blinked. The image did not fade. Instead, it deepened. The snow beneath the trees stirred, rolling back as though pushed by an invisible wind, and then she saw them, silhouettes shaped of soft light, drifting along the forest path in a graceful, silent procession. The frozen parade. Clara's breath caught. They moved as if guided by an unseen rhythm, their forms pulsing gently with every step. Among them, one figure glowed brighter than the resty, gentle aura of silver blue, drifting like a living lantern. As it passed, the pendant around Clara's neck warmed again. "It knows me," she realized, her pulse quickening. The scene shifted suddenly, the trees parting to reveal the stone slab in the clearing, the same slab where she had first discovered faint carvings beneath the snow. But in the vision, the carvings blazed with brilliance, as though freshly etched by a hand made of starlight. And in the center of the slab, something rested, pendant identical to hers. Clara's heart pounded as she reached toward the water instinctively, her fingers trembling. But before her hand could touch the surface, the image dissolved into ripples of pale blue light. A soft presence moved behind her. She turned, lantern trembling, but found only a faint glow coalescing into the shape of a figure, one of the drifting lights from earlier, but clearer now, more defined. It hovered a short distance away, its form swaying gently as though observing her. Clara rose slowly. "What do you want me to see?" she whispered. The figure extended a soft tendril of light toward her pendant. The chain warmed, and for a moment the glow intensified until Clara felt it pulsing with her heartbeat. The chamber air stirred, carrying a whisper, not words, not exactly, but a feeling, a memory, a promise repeated through winters long forgotten. Clara closed her eyes, letting the warmth fill her. When she opened them again, the figure had drifted back toward the far wall of the chamber, where a large circular arch of stone had begun to shimmer with frost. Patterns spiraled across its snowflakes, sigils, and the same branching lines she had seen in the frost etched onto the gallery window. A doorway, a real one, forming just for her. The pendant pulsed. Once more Clara steadied her breath. She stepped toward the arch, lantern held close. Beyond the frost-lit threshold, she sensed a world quieter and older than anything above. A world waiting. She whispered into the stillness, "I'm ready." And with the pendant guiding her, Clara crossed into the shimmering doorway as the chamber dimmed behind her, sealing her path toward the deeper secrets waiting beneath Waverly Hollow. The frost-lit doorway closed behind Clara with a soft, sighing hush, as if the air itself wished to keep her arrival a secret. The light from her lantern dimmed for a moment, adjusting to the strange atmosphere of the corridor she now stood within. A long, gently curving passage of pale stone, its walls glowing faintly with drifting patterns of snowflakes that shifted like living constellations. The pendant at her chest throbbed with a warm, rhythmic pulse, guiding her forward with a confidence she barely felt within herself. The silence was profound but comforting, a silence that seemed to breathe with her, rising and falling in slow, calming waves. As they walked, the corridor widened, revealing arches carved with swirling winter symbols she recognized from the gallery above. Each archway whispered with echoes of old voices, distant and blurred, murmuring like a choir drifting beneath deep water. Clara slowed, listening, though the words never formed fully. Only emotions reached her, longing, regret, hope, and the enduring softness of a promise left unfinished. She pressed her fingers against one of the glowing carvings, feeling a warmth beneath the stone that contradicted the icy patterns crawling across its surface. When she pulled her hand away, the pattern responded, swirling gently as though acknowledging her touch. The corridor opened suddenly into a vast dome-shaped chamber where the ceiling shimmered with the soft illusion of a night sky, flickering behind drifting clouds of pale blue light. In the center of the chamber stood a towering structure of frosted wood and silver metal, shaped like an enormous bell frame. But the bell itself was missing. Clara stepped closer, breath catching as she realized why the structure felt so familiar. It resembled the old bell tower she had seen in the historical sketches of Waverly Hollow, one said to have collapsed long before her grandmother was born. Yet here it stood, preserved in some strange, shimmering version of memory. As she circled it slowly, small orbs of white light drifted around the bell frame, swirling in silent patterns like snow caught in a windless storm. One orb drifted closer, hovering near her shoulder. Clara felt its presence like a gentle hand resting against her back, steadying her. Her voice came out soft, barely above a breath. "You're trying to show me something, aren't you?" The orb pulsed once. Beneath the bell frame, Clara noticed a platform of carved stone. Ancient symbols etched along its edge glowed faintly, and at the center lay a small indentation shaped like a teardrop. No, not a teardrop. A bell. A tiny bell. Her pendant warmed immediately. Clara knelt and lifted it in her hand. The carving matched the pendant perfectly, as if the two had been created together, meant to unite after years of separation. The bell frame shuddered softly, the orbs of light gathering like curious spirits hovering for the moment they had been waiting centuries to witness. With a calming breath, Clara placed her pendant into the carved indentation. The chamber exhaled. A soft tremor ran through the floor, followed by a sound so faint she almost mistook it for wind, then realized it was humming. A pure, unwavering note. The pendant glowed, sending lines of blue light spiraling outward across the platform, up the pillars, and into the frame. The entire structure responded like a living organism rediscovering its pulse. And then something materialized within the empty frame, a shape, forming from light and memory. A bell. But not solid. Not yet. It flickered like a ghost of metal, shimmering with a soft translucence. Clara rose slowly, unable to look away. The bell's form coalesced further, gaining weight, presence, and a quiet authority that filled the chamber with a sense of solemn anticipation. The orbs of light circled faster, creating a soft vortex of shimmering blue that lifted strands of Clara's hair. The humming grew deeper, more resonant, vibrating through her chest, as if echoing her heartbeat. A voice, gentle, distant, sorrowful, whispered from somewhere above the bell, threading through the air like a winter breeze. Return? What was lost, so we may rest? Clara's pulse quickened. Rest? She whispered. Who are you? The voice did not answer, not in words, but the chamber responded. Behind the bell frame, a section of the wall shimmered, revealing a scene like a memory carved into frost. A village celebration, lanterns in the snow, families gathered around tables, children laughing beneath wreaths of evergreen, and at the center of the square, the old bell tower gleaming with winter charms, its bell shining like a star. The image shifted abruptly. The night darkened, a storm rolled in, and figures cloaked in heavy coats hurried across the square. Panic, a sense of betrayal, shadows dragging something heavy from the tower. The bell. Clara's breath caught, the memory fractured, dissolving into drifting shards of light. When she looked back at the bell frame, the ghostly bell inside it gleamed brighter, almost solid now but incomplete. Clara stepped closer, heart pounding not from fear, but from a strange, inevitable understanding. I'm supposed to bring it back, she whispered. A piece is missing. The pendant on the platform pulsed. Once in agreement, the bell shimmered in response, sending a faint chime through the chamber, a single note filled with longing. Clara steadied her breath, lantern casting warm gold across the frostlit room. Then show me where to go next, she said softly. The orbs of light swirled, forming a path leading toward a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber. As the humming faded into a soft lull, Clara stepped toward the passage, the faint crystalline chime of the half-formed bell echoing behind her like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Asterisk. The passage Clara entered was narrower than any she had walked before, its walls curving inward like the ribs of some ancient creature slumbering beneath the earth. The faint orbs of light drifted ahead in a gentle line, guiding her deeper into the heart of the underground labyrinth. Her lantern glowed in soft, steady breaths, and the pendant left behind in the indentation beneath the spectral bell still pulsed faintly in her memory, as though its warmth clung to her skin long after she had stepped away. The air here was colder but clearer, carrying with it a faint metallic fragrance, like winter snow caught in an old iron fence. Clara's footsteps echoed softly, merging with the distant hum of the half-formed bell behind her, the sound stretching like a quiet thread tying her to all she had seen. She followed the lights until the passage widened into a long, arched hall carved with elaborate scenes, villagers celebrating beneath wreaths, lanterns swaying in gentle snowfall, families huddled together near firelight. But the farther she walked, the darker the carvings became. Shadows creeping between houses, indistinct figures taking something heavy from the bell tower, the outline of the old bell drawn with jagged strokes as though the artist's hand trembled in sorrow. Clara reached out to touch the carvings. The stone was cold, but the moment her fingers brushed the image of the stolen bell, a shiver ran through the wall. The carving shifted under her touch, its carved snow swirling as if brought to life by memory. Her lantern flickered, and suddenly Clara stood not in the hall, but in the heart of Waverley. How long ago? Vision unfolding around her like a silent snowfall. The square was blanketed in winter, lit by lanterns dimmed by an approaching storm. Villagers moved through the night, faces drawn with apprehension as the wind whipped their coats. At the center stood the majestic bell tower, its bells shimmering faintly with a pale, protective light. Clara watched figures slip through the crowd, 3 silhouettes hooded in thick cloaks, each carrying tools wrapped in cloth. Their movements were careful, desperate, purposeful. She followed them in the vision as they pushed open the tower door and climbed the narrow staircase within. The bell, enormous and luminous, seemed to radiate warmth into the cold stone walls. The carving shifted under her touch, its carved snow swirling as if brought to life by memory. Her lantern flickered, and suddenly Clara stood not in the hall but in the heart of Waverley, hollow, long ago, vision unfolding around her like a silent snowfall. The square was blanketed in winter, lit by lanterns, dimmed by an approaching storm. Villagers moved through the night, faces drawn with apprehension as the wind whipped their coats. At the center stood the majestic bell tower, its bell shimmering faintly with a pale, protective light. Clara watched figures slip through the crowd, 3 silhouettes hooded in thick cloaks, each carrying tools wrapped in cloth. Their movements were careful, desperate, purposeful. She followed them in the vision as they pushed open the tower door and climbed the narrow staircase within. The bell, enormous and luminous, seemed to radiate warmth into the cold stone walls. The tallest figure spoke first, voice trembling. "We don't have a choice. If the council won't listen, then we must." Another figure responded, breathless. "This bell binds more than celebration. It binds. Ooh, ah, ah. It keeps the memories from fading. If they silence it, everything goes with it." The third figure hesitated. "Then shouldn't we protect it?" "Yes," the first answered, "by hiding it before they destroy what it carries." Clara felt the ache in their voices, the conflict between loyalty and fear, between preserving the past and confronting those who wished to erase it. The vision shimmered, shifting to show the villagers discovering the theft, panic spiraling through the square. Lanterns flashed, voices rose, and then nothing. The scene dissolved into drifting frost. Clara blinked, and she was back in the carved hall, the stone walls pulsing with faint light as though acknowledging her understanding. "They didn't steal it to harm the village," she whispered. "They were trying to save its memories." Her voice softened into the quiet, but something went wrong. The orbs reappeared, swirling gently at her feet before moving toward a final doorway, ahead an arch of jagged stone draped in shimmering frost. Clara stepped through. The chamber beyond was small, circular, and filled with drifting threads of pale blue mist. At its center lay a pedestal of dark stone, and resting atop it was an object barely the size of her palm. A fragment of metal shaped like a delicate curve, glimmering with the same translucent light she had seen in the spectral bell. Clara recognized it immediately, the missing piece. The fragment pulsed softly as she approached, sending ripples through the mist that coiled around her like curious spirits. She lifted it gently. It was warm, impossibly warm, like holding a memory that refused to fade no matter how many winters passed. The chamber trembled, not with fear, but with relief. A soft voice, more sensation than sound, brushed her mind. Return it, complete what was broken, and we will show you the truth. Clara held the fragment close, her breath steady. She turned to leave, the orbs gathering around her like guides prepared to lead her back through the halls, back to the shimmering bell waiting in its frozen frame. As she stepped into the corridor, she felt the gentle weight of the moment settle around her. The path behind her filled with ancient echoes, the path ahead pulsing with quiet urgency. The secrets of Waverly Hollow were no longer shadows. They were reaching toward her with open hands, and she, lantern glowing softly in the dark, was ready to finish what had been left undone for generations. With the fragment safe in her grasp, Clara began the long, silent walk back toward the spectral bell, knowing that the next chime would reveal the truth hidden beneath centuries of winter. As the soft hum of the chamber faded behind her, Evelyn's warm whisper drifted as though carried on a snow-laden breeze. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. And if you've been enjoying our quiet journey tonight, consider subscribing to Midnight Murmurs Radio so our whispers can find you again on the next winter night.